since I was 19, and this connection to the trees and the earth and the stars and the spirit of the land, I really understood culture and ceremony as a way of life. And so it became so evident to me the last handful of years how disconnected we say we're doing all these things to support the Indigenous offender population, but in reality, they're just ticky boxes. Into the fire, here we go. Into the fire, head to toe. Into the fire, to be seen. Into the fire, to be.
Hello, this is Mark A. Lewis. This is the Sacred Village podcast. Today I have a ceremony acquaintance, friend. We're kind of getting to know each other. Somebody that I've seen in a few different ceremonies. You know, it's that space of doing your own work, and then there's conversation from time to time. Being in Indigenous ceremonies, quite often the men and the women are going in different directions, hanging out with different elders of the same gender. We're both assimilated people. I'll introduce this person in a second and get her perspective. But, identifying as a non-Indigenous person, and for me, I go into this territory of, okay, so if I'm not Indigenous, what am I? And then, I could identify as being white. I could identify as being an assimilated person in relation to being Indigenous. Do I go to the color of the skin? Do I go to the origin of my ancestors? Assimilated, settler. I don't know. I wasn't a part of a settling group of people. That would have been my ancestors. And so that relationship to my ancestors, do I feel close enough to connect to that process of moving from one territory to another? So there are individuals that would be able to connect to that more than others. And so then we get into spiritual connotation in relation to religious and, the Indigenous traditions. There's a very complicated history, as we all know, with religion. There are many Indigenous people who are religious in the Christian sense or the Catholic sense, and there are many that are traditionalists, connecting more to the spiritual teachings of the tradition, the traditions that are connected to the land, connected to the human experience, in an organic way, in a feeling way, in a way that connects to the archetypes of the sun and the moon and of Mother Earth. These more earth-based teachings. And welcome to the podcast, Sara. Thank you so much for joining me for a conversation.
Yeah, thank you very, very much, Mark. I'm very grateful to be here.
So I want to, just explore what you're comfortable exploring about your experience coming into the realm of Indigenous spirituality, Indigenous gatherings, teachings, forming friendships, people that we meet and the people that we deepen those connections with through the adversity that we experience in some of these ceremonies is a profound part of that connection and experience in my experience. So what can what comes to mind or heart for you, just off the top here around how you found your way there and, what speaks to you about this way of living?
I had been going to ceremony for a handful of years prior, and one of the elders that I worked with, he had a heart attack. He survived, very, very thankful for that. But just as a result of where his health was at, he wasn't able to host the sweat lodges that I had been going to, and attending or participating in sweat lodge ceremonies was something that I just got so much out of. And so I really noticed how I started to feel a bit unbalanced without them. I really found myself seeking somewhere else to attend ceremony during that time. Everything for me is always very synchronous. Spirit is leading the way. And I had some clients that really struggled with substance use, and that's not my area of expertise. And so I had been praying for a long time for more support and assistance with that. And in walks Bill Ward, who I think you know. And so Bill starts working with me at my former place of employment. And after a couple of months, I lost one of my clients. He passed away, and that just rocked me. And so after that, it became even more kind of urgent for me to seek out a place where I could participate in ceremony again. I had made my way up to a ceremony just north of Edmonton, but then it didn't work out due to scheduling, and just it just wasn't working out for me to be able to return there on a consistent basis. And so I reached out to Bill and I said, "Hey, do you have anywhere that you attend ceremony?" And he said, "Yep." And so he is the one that connected me with where you and I both go. And that's kind of how that part of the journey started.
Okay, now if we go back in time into your lineage and how you grew up,
Yeah.
can you tell us a little bit about that spiritual evolution or religious process of discovering this path?
Just to start it off, I guess I did not grow up in a religious home. I did
Hmm.
not grow up in a spiritual home. When I was in my late teens, my mom started kind of exploring a little bit more of, I would say more like new age spiritual stuff, but I didn't believe in it. I distinctly remember like thinking, what the heck is she on about? So I didn't grow up with it, but I did grow up when I was very young with a strong connection to nature. I kind of lost that for a period of time from the ages of like 8 to 18, 19-ish. But I have this distinct experience that I remember when I was 19. I was going through just a very difficult period in my life. And I had been praying a ton, even though like I didn't really have any context for what prayer was or what prayer should be, or no one told me to pray. I think I was so desperate that I found myself kind of speaking to spirit all the time, seeking guidance, seeking answers. And I had this experience where it was the evening, and all of a sudden I could sense that like the trees were trying to speak to me. I live in Drumheller, which is a valley. So there's hills on either side. I had this sense that the hills were trying to speak to me. And then the stars, I felt were trying to speak to me too. And so that was kind of my first experience of like, whoa, like what is going on here? I didn't understand it, but I knew that it was something. And so my journey that was kind of the thing that kicked off a lot of exploration for me.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't grow up with religion. I mean, we went to church a few times with family at Christmas time and that kind of thing. But the external world was spirit, in that that's what remains is,
Mhm.
the money that you earn, the things that you have. That's sort of, the last option in a way for a spiritual connection, because we do need to tether to God through something in some way. That's
Yeah.
my feeling. And, you can put it in different words, but, I do feel like it's a connection to God, to the external manifestation of creativity in one way or another. But that
Mhm.
certainly didn't have the depth that I needed as a person in the world, and the community organization. It didn't have that part either. So if you encounter the question of, who are you in this, spectrum of Indigenous, non-Indigenous, what words come to mind for you, or that, that you feel comfortable with?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel extremely grateful and privileged to be welcomed into these ceremonies and these circles. I would say I I do identify with being like colonizer, settler. My family, especially on my mom's side, like came over in the early 1900s, got the farmland, all that kind of stuff. So it is something that I continue to sit with. I have so many friends, so many people that I know, primarily of First Nations heritage, but in general, Indigenous friends, some family members. And so I'm just very acutely aware of the impact of colonization. And so I do identify as someone whose family was a part of that. And it's something that I really sit with often, or like anytime it comes up, because I do feel this massive, I don't know if I would describe it as internal conflict, but I guess I feel so bad for what happened. I obviously don't feel like I was a part of that, but just knowing that, and I don't think that my ancestors knew the extent of what was happening, but I don't know. There's definitely stuff there like it's something I'm acutely aware of.
It's a really interesting phenomenon, and I think it's very important to, I want to say tread carefully, but tread mindfully, because it's difficult to predict when a situation will arise where that mindfulness will be important.
Mm-hmm.
There's certainly, let's say for me, 95% of the time that I'm taking a part in the community events and ceremonies, none of that arises. It's not a
Mm-hmm.
concern. If
Yeah.
I'm contemplating it, I'm getting in the way of being in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
There's thought constructs that can get in the way of me and my healing. There are ways of distancing, so I don't have to be vulnerable. It's a paradox. I can
Yeah.
actually use those constructs to try to create a barrier of safety that is actually keeping me from connection and the reason I'm
Yes.
there.
Yep.
So it's a bit of a quantum soup, but at the same time, yeah, there's this past. And, I think it's fair to say that if you look at the past of each individual, they're going to have some ugliness in their past that they're going to
Mm-hmm.
have to look at. That's across the board. And so,
Mm-hmm.
but we have a cultural phenomenon now. I've spent a lot of time contemplating this and been in, many ceremonies that where this topic is, or energetic reality, this energetic phenomenon has emerged. And what's come up for me is certainly the orientation and understanding and mindfulness around privilege. So,
Mm-hmm.
and there will be white people or assimilated people. And once I like the word assimilated, because then
Mm-hmm.
it's a paradigm of, distinction of perspective, of orientation around tradition, orientation around awareness of body, awareness of feeling, awareness of spirit, and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different type of orientation. And then, all bets are off. You can be of any lineage,
Mm-hmm.
any ancestry. It doesn't matter. But
Mm-hmm.
it's also more complicated than that. But the privilege
Mm-hmm.
point, like I just, just to say that there are white people who are not privileged at all based on a certain context of, whatever. There's just
Yes.
circumstances that can create, a freeway or train wreck into destruction,
Mm-hmm.
and that they have no power over. And that's
Oh,
just
of
based
course.
on
Yep.
circumstance and a lack of privilege in a sense. So, but I
Yep.
have a lot of privilege, and I say that it is very complex. Like the amount of grieving that I've done since starting my spiritual path has been, and as far as I know, I don't know very many people who have had to go through that. And so is that karmic? What does that say about my privilege? There's a responsibility. There's like a feeling, a depth of sorrow, a depth of pain, a depth of suffering, or let's say like experiences of suffering, on many occasions. But that's manifested as a privilege that is goes way beyond money.
Mm-hmm.
Now I have a privilege of seeing, of understanding. That's a different form of privilege that I can use to help. And so, but the financial part, my parents owned an office building, and I had an early inheritance of that to help me with the land development.
Mm-hmm.
That's an astonishing privilege, just in terms of power structures and of history of land
Yep.
occupation. I've had visions of making sure that I don't keep it all, to work
Mm-hmm.
with the money and to give back in certain
Mm-hmm.
percentages into Indigenous traditions, which has nothing to do with me going into Indigenous ceremony. I am not going
Mm-hmm.
there as a savior or a missionary,
Yeah.
or anything. It's the other way around. The ceremonies have guided me through this transformation where I've been able to see this for what it is and then, react accordingly. So anyways,
Mm-hmm.
that's why I call it conversation, not interview. Because
Yes. Yeah. No,
I
I
do
love
like
it.
to, yeah, I like the freedom to be able to go on these tangents. Is there anything else that comes up for you around that topic, with that in mind?
Um, I think the only other thing that was coming to mind was just, and I had touched on this, like I do feel very privileged to be welcomed into the ceremonies, and I know a handful of elders, and they have always been been very welcoming and very supportive. But I'm just always mindful, and to speak to your point, like when I'm in ceremony, I'm focused on, being there and praying and doing the work. But I think I'm always very mindful of the fact that, not everyone will necessarily be happy with my presence. I've
Mm,
never, like I said, I've always felt welcomed with open arms, but
hmm
just I've been privy to so many conversations, incredible conversations, and even as the, quote unquote, like white person in the room, because
hmm
in my former job, I was always working in the Indigenous intervention side of the house, and so I was, yeah, just always welcomed into these spaces, even though there was a part of me that worried that I didn't belong. Um, but having so much respect and being so open to everyone's perspectives and opinions and not taking it personally, um, that's just, yeah, it's just always very present for me. I'm grateful to be in these spaces, but I'm also just very mindful of, the impact that my presence may also have.
I find that the teachings, that the ritual or the ceremony, the experience of being in ceremony, that it's always cultivating mindfulness and awareness,
Hmm. Hmm.
um, and for everybody. And
Hmm.
so, it's not just the white people that have to come and do the mindfulness ritual, the mindfulness ceremony. It's just happening all the time for everybody,
Hmm.
which is simultaneously opening hearts. It's masks are dropping,
Yeah.
vulnerability is exposed, the deeper truth of a sincerity of a person is exposed over time, slowly. And it may happen slower if there's different skin colors, if people are looking at each other through a lens of, I don't really know what to make of you. And it's going to take me time in my body to really feel at rest when I'm around you for whatever reason.
Hmm. Hmm.
So these phenomena are just happening, but that's such an important part of reconciliation also.
Hmm.
It's a mutual experience too. Everybody's having that experience. And so there's reconciliation happening just as a phenomenon, a spiritual phenomenon in the air, as opposed to it being dictated politically towards one person or another. It just sort of happens naturally in whatever way it needs to,
Hmm.
which is also a beautiful thing. But yeah, I do appreciate your presence.
Hmm.
In that context, and you can tell that you have a deep sensitivity just as an individual.
Hmm.
And you bring that
Thank you.
into those spaces. Yeah, it's very, very
Thanks, Mark.
apparent. So. Yeah, and I think it's, there is the money, there are the power structures that, in terms of how we're seen, like white passing and that kind of thing.
Hmm.
Many political sort of phenomenon that need to be tracked, I believe, in a mindful way. But
Hmm.
just going back to the greatest privilege I have is being able to actually talk to real elders and to
Yeah.
do authentic ceremony. Like that is the greatest privilege of my life. And I think any person of any race, in that situation would understand where I'm coming from and possibly agree with that. So for themselves. So, but
Yeah.
where did you work? Tell me or tell us,
Yeah.
because eventually it won't just be you and I. It's kind of a funny thing. I'm very mindful about pretending. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of easing into the make believe aspects of doing a podcast, and the technology and the feedback and being able to hear my voice when I'm editing, and kind of like, oh, that's funny. I did not hear that person the first time around, and I said something that had nothing to do with what they just said. It's very humbling sometimes,
Yes, for sure. I can
Yeah,
imagine.
yeah.
Yeah.
So your trajectory with work and in relation to
Hmm.
your spiritual path, yeah,
Hmm.
what can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So my former place of employment, I used to work with Correction Services of Canada. I worked in a medium security federal men's penitentiary. I was meant to be there. It was so synchronous. I had been reconnecting with spirit, my intuition. I was healing from an autoimmune condition at the time, so I was just very doing a lot of internal work. And one thing kind of led to another, and I had this opportunity to go and do this job. And everything inside of me told me to go and do it. I was living in Victoria at the time when this opportunity came up, and, was reconsidering moving back to my hometown. And so, moved back here and started working at the institution. My main role was as a parole officer. The only real requirement for being a parole officer is to have a university degree of any type. I had such a interest and a fascination due to the personal healing work that I was doing. It ended up being a beautiful fit for me. I really enjoyed working with the men. And about 6 months in, our site at the time had become what's called an Indigenous Intervention Center. And it's just because of the population of Indigenous offenders we had, like the numbers were so high that they designated us as this site. So then they wanted specific parole officers who were designated to work with Indigenous offenders. There was, some interesting dynamics to the role that were also specific to that work that I was doing. My entire career from that point forward was on the Indigenous interventions side of the house up until when I left about 6 months ago.
What was the autoimmune issue that you were dealing with?
I had Lyme disease.
Yeah, so that can be a really big deal. Do you feel, was that helpful in certain ways for you in terms of going a little deeper into your
Oh,
own?
yeah.
Yeah.
That changed my life in the best possible way. It was kind of like a course correction for me. There's a few pivotal moments like throughout my life when there was kind of these like course corrections or reconnection to spirit. But that whole journey of trying to figure out how to heal and then the healing changed the direction of my life.
Right. Would
Yeah.
you say that it was a humbling experience also in ways?
Incredibly humbling. Yeah. It brought me to my knees on more than one occasion, and just it didn't force surrender, because I know surrender was a choice. But it got me to surrender to the journey and the process and everything. Yeah, very humbling.
Then you were led to work with men in a correctional institution. So so you're going through this experience, and you have a gentle disposition. I imagine you did 6 years ago. So what was
Yep.
that like? What was that interaction like with these First Nations men?
And I did work with non-Indigenous clients as well.
Oh, okay.
So there was a bit of a mix, but it was the focus was always primarily on the Indigenous offender population, but as well Indigenous interventions. It's very interesting because one of my clients who he was on my caseload when I first started my career as a parole officer, and I'm still in contact with him now. I still am a bit of a support for him. He's not in the federal system, he's in the provincial system now, but it's interesting knowing him because he's known me my whole career, and he sometimes teases me about how I was a bit harsh at first. And going into the role, and not really, I didn't understand addictions at the time. I was listening to everyone else's kind of view on those that are involved in the criminal justice system. It's very us against them. Doesn't matter if it's men, women, doesn't matter the race. Like, it's just, if someone's an offender, it's kind of this view of us versus them. And so when I first started, I was really trying to figure out not just my place, but how to do the work in a way that was in alignment with me. And so I think I know I was a little bit tough on them in the beginning, which I don't think is a bad thing, because I think it was a good way to kind of set boundaries initially. But I will say I noticed a huge shift in the way that I did the work the last 3 years. I think I was so sure of myself. I was really great at the professional boundaries, in terms of they knew that I was there to be a positive support, but I also had done so much work, especially these last 3 years. And I think it's also a reflection of the intense level of work that I've done on myself over the last 6 years, my involvement in ceremony, my connection with
Mm-hmm.
spirit, all the things. I had done a lot of work these last 3 years to create a lot of safety, and to just hold space for conversation. So it went from, 6 years ago when I first started working with this one particular client, but just at that time having, my first kind of caseload. And if someone tested positive for urinalysis, it was kind of a bit of like a shame approach. Or if someone had a failed release, it was kind of, oh, like, why didn't you do better in that kind of approach, which I
Mm-hmm.
cringe at now because that's not, I'm like, oh my gosh, I was so uninformed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and versus, when I left, it was more of, when a client would come back, it'd be like, okay, let's sit and talk, like let's come up with a game plan, or let's hash out, what went wrong and what came up for you. And it was just much more of like a human level approach. And yeah, I just did a lot of work to create a lot of safety.
Does your job always have to do with integration into back into society, or does it have to do with,
That was always like my focus, because at the end of the day, almost every single one of my clients was going to be, I mean, they all had the opportunity to get back out, whether or not they were going to do the work to allow for those opportunities. But that was always kind of my focus, was the preparation for release. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And what did you notice in terms, and this would probably cross over into all different demographics, but
Hmm.
what are the main stumbling blocks for people when it comes to, I mean, really, we're talking about changing, I would imagine, some very deeply seated, deeply entrenched patterns
Yeah.
of behavior and
Yeah.
thought. And it can be a
And
huge journey.
worldviews
Yeah,
and
certainly.
personal views. I had
Mm-hmm.
a couple of years ago, probably 2.5 years ago, I had a couple of offenders sitting in my office, and they were just chatting. And I don't even know how we got on this topic, but they both shared, and they didn't know each other outside of jail, from very different communities. One had grown up in Edmonton, one had grown up, I can't remember where, somewhere in Saskatchewan. Anyways, they both talked about being children. Like the one remembers, like he was still in diapers and slinging drugs. So the one that was still in diapers, he was like, my mom was passed out. People were coming to the house to get drugs. I knew that one bag was worth whatever, $10 or whatever it was. So he said, I would do that.
Oh my goodness.
Um, and like, but that's the reality. I think it's so easy for people to say, oh, they should do better, they're making bad decisions, or whatever. Like this
Mm-hmm.
very generalized opinions or perspectives. But the reality is that many of my clients just grew up in these environments where these certain types of behaviors were just normal, and oftentimes have been in survival mode, sometimes from like since being in the womb,
Mm-hmm.
but from such young ages that, and this ties into kind of the work that I'm, I guess, not doing now, but I'm training in, the somatic experiencing, which is all about it's the nervous system. And so from that lens, almost all of my clients' nervous systems have been extremely dysregulated since they were children. And so they don't have the same concept of normal. And so
Yeah.
that for me is the big thing, because oftentimes the release comes, and the release on its own is very dysregulating to shift from one environment to another, and they're so different, and just lack of support, and I mean, there's so much I could talk
Mm-hmm.
for a very long time about it, but
Yeah.
at the heart for
So
me,
very
it's like,
complex.
yeah, at the heart for me, it's like there's, been such a deep rooted pattern of nervous system dysregulation for so long. And then we're just expecting them to be all of a sudden regulated. And
Yeah.
that's not realistic.
And the human experience, in my experience, in terms of perspective and how we see the world, is it's very complex. So you get into
Hmm.
relationships. Like my primary touchstone is intimate relationships,
Okay.
and in order to be able to see the susceptibility that people have to changing their environment without knowing it in order to create an outcome, even if it's a negative outcome, because it suits the paradigm, through which they
Mm-hmm.
view the world based on their
Mm-hmm.
upbringing. And so this
Yeah.
concept of, our unconscious definition of love, we're trying to manifest what feels familiar. We're not trying
Yes.
to manifest love. We're trying to
Yeah.
manifest what feels familiar. You use the word normal. And so I think
Yeah.
we're talking about the same thing, is what feels like a normal experience, and how do I recreate that so I feel comfortable, so the child within feels comfortable. And
Yes.
in order to
Absolutely.
rewire that, like, are you kidding me? Like, there's so much, it's such a journey and a
Mm-hmm.
commitment to, I mean, I remember it was an elder that shared, I was going through a very difficult time in my journey about 10 years ago, as I was just starting on the path, and having, very deep grief coming up, to the degree that it was disorientating, because I was starting to do ceremony and it was opening me up. But this is very much outside of ceremony. And for about 48 hours, I knew where I was, but it wasn't where I was. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
did not have a, an emotional sort of touchstone, or a real conviction, a real sort of sense of rootedness. It was all very existentially life, and everything about it, everything that I could see and put my hands on and my mind on, had changed form in a certain way, because of how deep I had dug into, unearthing these old ways of being. And so I was in
Mm-hmm.
this process of transformation. I reached out to this elder about love, wanting to feel, if I'm going to be in relationship with somebody, I want to know that, that they can love me. And his response to that was, love is how we show up. Being
Mm-hmm.
able to take it off of an expectation of being loved, and how can I be loving towards whoever I'm around, and have that as a grounded intention. Because when
Mm-hmm.
you are connected and you're not feeling untethered, and you're not feeling like you need somebody to feel tethered, if you're not in that, psychology of being like needing a parent like a child would, if you're truly in a rooted adult state, so to speak, that is that highest level of being. And that was so out of
Mm-hmm.
reach for me at the time. But in order to
Mm-hmm.
really, to be truly autonomous, it's like, that needs to be a primary, not, maybe not 100% of the time, but it has to be a primary way of operating. And that's a very tall order, is, from what I experienced. Yeah. So you're in this experience with these men, and I'm curious about,
Mm-hmm.
what you witnessed in terms of being able to listen and problem solve with them and meet them where they're at. I'm imagining, this
Mm-hmm.
is unfolding, and in the backdrop, in terms of the administrative side or the policy side, was there a
Mm-hmm.
risk of imposing assimilation onto, I mean, it would be the white men as well, but certainly the
Yeah.
indigenous people, that stands out. Was that becoming, part of that
Yes.
puzzle that you were trying to
Um,
navigate?
yeah. So I think what I want to say about that, because it's been 4 or 5 years now that I've been quite involved in ceremony. So these last 3 years that I was there, I just like trying to think of how to explain it. We had one senior manager there who basically viewed Indigenous culture as kind of like a hobby.
Yeah, that makes
And
sense. Yeah, I
and
can see that.
especially, from since I was 19, and this connection to like the trees and the earth and the stars and like the spirit of the land, I really understood culture and ceremony as a way of life. And so
Uh-huh.
it became so evident to me the last handful of years how disconnected, like we say we're doing all these things to support the Indigenous offender population, but in reality, they're just ticky boxes.
Uh-huh.
And no one, at least at our site, I can't speak for other sites, but I can speak for
Uh-huh.
our site. No one in management had any sort of connection to culture, ceremony, spirit, for that matter. And so, yes, there was this massive disconnect that, we would, at our site, there's this program, it's called Pathways Program. A lot of the Indigenous offenders are kind of pushed in that direction. And if an offender didn't want to participate, then it wouldn't necessarily be used against him, but it could be kind of in a, well, he doesn't want to
Uh-huh.
do it, so he must not be serious
Uh-huh.
about it.
Mm-hmm.
Or like there's these things are called escorted temporary absences, and path offenders who are on the Pathways program are usually the ones that are supported for these ETAs, we call them. And
Mm-hmm.
so if an offender didn't want to go on Pathways, then, there's one case I'm thinking of that they were like, well, no, we're not supporting him for this. And so we kind of, the management has this view of what it means to be Indigenous, and that means you need to be participating in the ways that we say you need to be participating. And if you're not, then you're not serious. And so there's just this massive, massive disconnect, that then it's kind of like we're pushing this agenda on the men, or there's these few touch points that people will. I'm trying to think of like what exactly it is, but these few things that they'll hone in on, and it's like, oh well, they're not doing that. And even like
Mm-hmm.
the kinship systems, right? And that, like, there was so many things, and ultimately that was a big part of why I left, was because I just couldn't continue to be a witness to the disconnect and the way that things were being used against the men, when I was just like, it's so messy. I had advocated as much as I possibly could. And it was going nowhere, and I was kind of becoming the problem, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and so I just decided, kind of for my own mental health, I needed to leave. I had a lot of guilt around that, though, because I was such a strong advocate. And just the way things worked out, I was kind of the last one left. And so I had a lot of guilt about leaving, but um, that was ultimately why.
It resonates what you're saying. That phenomenon definitely exists everywhere. If you're
Yeah.
going to, and in this case, it's like, okay, you're busted. Now, what that means is
Hmm.
that we're going to institutionalize you first,
Hmm.
and we're going to, there will be people that are wanting to hear your story. That
Hmm.
there can be some healing that happens within this institution. But before you leave, we're going to make sure that we assimilate you
Hmm.
into the culture.
Hmm.
Because if we don't, we're not doing our job. And for all intents and purposes, the awareness around what that actually means is very minimal.
Hmm.
Because there's generally, it'll be assimilated people that are assimilating the other people, and people that are
Yes.
assimilated do not know that they're
Yeah.
assimilated
Yeah. Yeah.
because they're assimilated.
Yeah.
So,
They have no other like frame of
yeah.
reference.
So I'm curious, what if you put deeply thinking, deeply feeling elder in the context of
Hmm.
that? Would he or she have to start to change the policies and break the brains of hundreds of assimilated bureaucrats? And I don't mean to be hard on human beings. It's just,
Hmm.
it's a part of being in a colonized civilization. When
Hmm.
we grow up as, colonized people, we are from birth, we are
Hmm.
colonizing and colonizing every individual that's born,
Hmm.
and assimilating them, in our upbringing, which
Hmm.
is 90% of the well of tears for myself had to do with letting go of the trauma that was passed on to me ancestrally, but also through the construct of colonization and expectation within that construct. So it's kind
Hmm.
of like been there, right? When I see people go into ceremony, I've noticed quite a few people like yourself and myself, where you get in there doing one thing in the world, 3 or 4 years later, not too long, once you've been on this path,
Hmm.
you end up
Hmm.
changing what you're
Hmm.
doing and having to leave these situations like you've had to leave, and that guilt and that sort of feeling responsible in a way for the
Hmm.
connections to for the resolution or something that's being worked on in progress, and to break free of that is,
Hmm.
yeah, it's a tough thing. But
Hmm.
um, I want to, if there's anything you want to touch on there, let me know, and if not, I'd want to get into what you're doing now.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I think it's okay to move forward. I probably talked about it enough anyways, so.
Okay. Okay. So then, yeah, you start, your own healing, and you're sort of working through these
Mhm.
things, and tell us about, what's on the horizon.
Right. Well, I'm I'm in this. beautiful place of I don't know what's on the horizon. I'm very lucky to be in the place where I am now. So I've completely like resigned from that former position, which I think was a shock to some people. Um, a lot of people don't leave government jobs, right? And I
Mm,
totally could have stayed on a little bit longer, even like on a leave, but I knew. And I think that's part of the beauty of, just the depth of the work that I've been doing the last couple of years and how strongly my faith is. And, I pray a lot about everything. And so I just had this knowing of like, I knew I wasn't going back. I knew that chapter had kind of come to an end. So this summer was, my second year of my commitments to some of the ceremonies that you and I are involved in. Last year was my first year, and I got so much guidance, and I was really connected with the power of prayer. Like I've always
mhm,
prayed, but it became so automatic after last year for me to just, at any sign of difficulty, I just pray automatically at this point.
mhm,
And this year, from ceremony, the lessons were much deeper. I don't even know how to explain it. It was beautiful. I do somatic experiencing. So I am the client. I get somatic experiencing sessions, and kind of exploring all avenues of things. I listened to your podcast with Tara. I didn't realize she did Cambo, and I became aware of Cambo a couple of years ago. And so that resonated. So we'll see if it's a fit for me to explore that as well. My sense is I'll hopefully be in this space for at least a few more months. I have some ideas of maybe what's next for me, but I don't. I'm one to always, I want to know what's coming. I want to know what's next. And I'm trying to not grasp for that and just allow myself to be where I am and kind of find my way organically to the next place.
You're a client of somatic experience,
Yes,
and
but I
you're
am training in it as
you're
well.
you're also training in it, right?
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
can you, in a nutshell, give us an idea of what that is?
Yeah, so I actually did write it down so that I could, because I'm not very articulate when I try to describe it. So, somatic experiencing was developed by Dr. Peter Levine, and so says it's a mind-body approach to trauma recovery. It helps to resolve the physical and emotional symptoms of stress, shock, and trauma by tracking the internal sensations in the body. So my favorite way to describe it is like the work that we're doing in somatic experiencing is to expand the capacity of the nervous system. Because if we have a really narrow capacity for activation or sensation, we will just constantly be in a state of like overwhelm and trying to avoid feeling whatever is arising for us. And the more work we do to expand our nervous system capacity, the more comfortable we are to be in a state of like relaxation and peace. But also, we're much more comfortable with holding space and staying present when there is activation, like when there is a trigger of some sort. We're able to like hold our awareness and stay present while we kind of like process whatever it is that's happening.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah, I once an elder at a Sundance that I was firekeeping at, and she was saying that very succinctly said the game isn't to stop suffering and stop having overwhelm and having difficult experiences. The intention here is to change how we respond to those feelings
Hmm.
and being able to
Yeah.
manage them and feel them. It seems to be, the fundamental, let's say, aspect of healing is
Yes.
reorientating and relearning how to respond to our nervous system and the stories that come up and set
Yeah.
off other
And the
uh
impulses. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, to be responsive instead of reactive.
Yes.
Yeah, so very important. With Mother Ayahuasca, I went through
Mm.
many very difficult somatic experiences guided by that spirit that were very difficult, but I was
Hmm.
reliving panic because I would have
Hmm.
panic attacks before I started working with that medicine. And so for the first probably half a dozen ceremonies that I did, I would get the pleasure of reliving these panic attacks under the
Mm-hmm.
guidance of this. It would be like having these experiences under the guidance of a doctor that was there, or a professional, but it was a
Mm-hmm.
spirit. And it was
Mm-hmm.
reliving these experiences, going through, and each time that I would go through them, I would I would become more familiar with the nuances of the experience. And while doing so, they would be shorter and shorter and less intense.
Mm.
I wouldn't say less intense, because I think, the spirit would turn the volume up to whatever degree I was able to take in order to
Yeah.
really live that in a held experience. So then when
Mm-hmm.
it came up outside in my regular life, what happened, it's not like I was given this information or this instruction, but what would happen is that it would be fleeting. Like my brain would begin to recognize this not as a threat, but
Mm-hmm.
just as a fleeting experience that's here now and will be gone in a few moments. Where
Mm-hmm.
before it was like my reaction to the experience, the panic attack, would become the real panic attack. So,
Mm-hmm.
anyways, it just feels like really important work. I'm
Yeah.
glad you're,
Like
yeah,
that's the heart of what somatic experiencing is. And I think that that's genuinely like the heart of healing,
yeah, I
because we're completing the
agree.
nervous system response by allowing ourselves to feel through whatever is arising.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
it dictates our relationship with what we're feeling, and
Mm-hmm.
our reaction or response. That has everything to do with how well we parent,
Mm-hmm.
and how we show up in the world with other adults. Like,
Yeah.
that's sort of the heart of what we're passing on and to our environment, and particularly our children.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
very much.
Well, maybe you'll end up pursuing that.
Yeah, I've
Nudge,
definitely
nudge.
I know, right? Well, I've definitely thought about it because even in my former career, I see such a need for that, but I also could see how the men that I worked with, were just in a state of such overwhelm all
Yeah,
the time.
yeah.
Right. And so it became so evident to me, and probably because it's like once you start focusing on something or seeing something, you start to see it everywhere.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's just, and even I guess my own journey of healing and how much I've noticed that doing the work of somatic experiencing for myself has been kind of the key, because then I take that with me into ceremony, like when I'm sitting in a sweat lodge and something is trying to come up, I'm using those
Hmm.
skills of, okay, I'm going to sit with this discomfort. I'm going to, do my best to track the sensations and be as present with it as I can. And, it's the same when I'm fasting, because it's very uncomfortable and there's no escape, same as in Sundance, right? Like you're intentionally putting yourself through this discomfort.
Hmm.
And the less you fight it and the more you surrender to the experience, I don't know that it will ever be easy, but it's certainly easier when you're not fighting it.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, it's just been invaluable, kind of an invaluable foundation that I take with me into every aspect of my life.
Yeah, I can definitely
Mhm.
relate to the sweat lodge. Yeah, yeah. I found very early on that the panic attacks would be triggered in sweats, not from the heat, but from when my body was telling me, or my mind was telling me that if there were medicines or whatever, and it
Mm,
was dark and the door was closed, and my breathing would be inhibited. There would be a
mhm,
message, because I nearly drowned when I was 7 years old. And I believe this is what has caused this, but a
mhm,
very intense reaction where I'd be crawling up the walls of this lodge
mhm,
for the first round, if that was triggered, and,
mhm,
but guided to stay. And I never did leave. I never did have to leave, or I haven't to this
mm,
day. And it seems to be getting a lot easier, but
mm,
it is something that I've had to step into over and over again,
mhm.
just as a part of, spirit guided, rites of passage, in order to be able to hold space for other people and just to show up on this path. But
Yeah.
yeah, the somatic experience. It's very powerful. It's very powerful.
Yes. Yeah. It's beautiful.
Hmm. And so going back to the, your previous work, is
Mhm.
there a somatic experience process or counseling or, for people that are incarcerated?
Not that I'm aware of. So we do have, I shouldn't say we, I'm like no longer a part of the organization, obviously, but they do have like psychologists that are on staff, addictions counselors, that kind of thing. And depending on kind of like the background of the psychologist, they have had different therapies. Like I don't know much about ART, but I know one of our psychologists was, um, or someone in the mental health department was offering that and different things. But they do tend to shy away from trauma specific therapies in corrections. I personally think somatic experiencing would be phenomenal because it's very, very gentle. You don't
Hmm.
ever actually have to like rehash a traumatic event because you can just,
Hmm.
think of the sensation of feeling anxious and then explore the sensations that arise in the body. You don't ever have to actually, recall a memory or like go into something that could be traumatic. But I was lucky enough. So I am also a yoga teacher. I had a former manager who really advocated for me to be able to teach yoga to the men. And so
Oh,
for the
okay.
last year before I left, I was teaching like a weekly yoga class over the lunchtime, and I would incorporate, obviously the somatic experiencing kind of like principles into the classes. But as far as I know, like there's the odd institution here and there that even incorporates yoga. But as far as I know, there's really not, I don't know of anyone doing somatic experiencing specifically, but even trauma-based therapies, I don't think really are present in the correction system.
How about sweats?
Yes, there are sweat lodge ceremonies. I believe every single institution, I don't want to say across the country because I don't know, but I'm pretty sure, at least in the prairie region, everywhere has elders and at least some access to ceremony. We often struggle, or they often struggle, with having enough elders to fill the capacity that they have. But there's oftentimes sweat lodge ceremonies that are made available to the men and various, like depending on, there's different healing lodges. There's, throughout each province. And so those healing lodges have a much stronger focus on ceremony. So there's more opportunities available through the healing lodges than there is just at the institutions. But yes, there is ceremony and access to elders to some degree.
I wonder from the point of view of the institution and the like the construct, but also the people that are in charge of the policies and in charge of from the top down doing
Hmm.
the administration in these institutions. Does it exist because it can be seen through the lens? I'm just
Mhm.
curious what you think of this
Mhm.
theory, but is it allowed because it can be seen as a hobby? Or is it a sign that there's something happening? We're culturally going through just a very slow transformation, which is taking
Yeah.
our power back as, wounded people, traumatized people.
Yeah. I would say both are true.
Hmm.
I would say that, because this one sector of CSC, Indigenous initiatives, um, a, a handful, a lot of the staff have grown up in ceremony, and with culture and with an understanding of the value of that being made available. And even within the institutions, like there are certainly at least a handful of people, if not more, who understand the value of it and see the impact, on the men or women at the women's sites. But there are also people in positions of power, at least within the individual sites, who view it as a hobby and just don't have any understanding for it and very I want to say no respect for it, but I hope that they have a little bit of respect for it. So I think both are true. I think that there are groups of people and certain levels where they do have a deep respect and a deep understanding for its value. And then there are others that are also in positions of power, that don't
Yeah.
see it that way. It's a hobby, or it's a checkbox because we're supposed to have whatever those
Yeah.
things made available. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be a real blessing for everybody to get together in circle to start anybody's, life sentence. It's like, okay, well, you have this sentence, and now we're going to sit down in circle with the administrator, the warden, and here's the
Hmm.
mayor, and we're all going to sit down in circle and share talk about our feelings. That's what we're going to
Hmm.
do first and foremost. It's like,
Hmm.
could you imagine that ever being a thing? But obviously,
Right.
it would be it wouldn't take that long, and it would be such a monumental shift in,
Yeah.
perspective and relationship and consciousness.
Hmm.
Anyways, I have two more questions. The first is, how are you on the healing from the Lyme disease? Is that something that,
Oh,
that
yeah.
does that stick with you for your life, or, how does that work?
So I feel as though I am 100% recovered. I have
Okay.
felt that way for the last 3 years. I have not gotten my blood work tested. Part of my not doing that is just kind of because of the inconvenience of that, but also because I feel healed and like in my mind I am.
Mm-hmm.
I also don't want to go and get the testing and then find out that it's still present but maybe dormant because I worry about how that might affect my mindset. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, no, I about 3 years ago, I felt that I just kind of had this recovery, and I don't really know how to explain it
Yeah.
other than I just kind of felt it like leave my system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's beautiful, and it doesn't surprise me. I think, it's hard for me to fully embody this teaching, but I've had it a few separate times in ceremony that, all of these experiences are spiritual. They are all
Mhm.
about our
Yes.
relationship with God.
Yeah.
So,
And I
yeah.
felt like I learned the lesson that it came into my life to teach me.
Hmm. Hmm.
Hmm. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, I mean, the only other question here is, do you have anything else that you want to share with the audience? Is there anything that comes to heart or mind, that just as we close here?
Yeah, I think all the work that I've done really since I was 19 and kind of started having this like shift in my perspective of the world and spirit and deepening into understanding that. All the work that I've done has really been about kind of like coming back home to myself, and connecting with my intuition. I loosely use, like my intuition as well as like connecting to spirit and like just the
Mm-hmm.
guidance that I feel.
Hmm.
Because at the time, like I couldn't explain why did I feel drawn to certain things? Why, why do I have this sense that the trees are talking to me? And how do I figure that out? Like all these pieces that seemed so disjointed and so kind of confusing at the time. But looking back, right, they always say hindsight's 2020, and I can see how clearly I was being led. And a lot of people always ask, well, like, how do I heal or how do I get there? And the thing that I keep coming back to is, I think we all have to just reconnect to ourselves and our intuition and allow our own intuition, allow spirit to guide us because our paths are so unique
Uh,
and so individual. So there's, I could outline the 100 different things that I've done to get here, but I don't ever feel that that's um, something that I should do because no one should follow the path that I've followed. Like we
mhm.
should all just follow our own path. Our spirits are so intelligent. The
Mhm.
universe is so intelligent. Like we all have our own path. We just need to learn to listen to it and follow it. So I wanted to
Yeah,
share that.
beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah,
That
you're very
really,
welcome.
kind of captures the essence of our whole talk.
Hmm.
That's ultimately the medicine for assimilation, because assimilation is about
Yes.
entering a construct that was created by somebody else
Yeah.
or a group of other people in order for us to be part of an organized, um, you know, and manageable,
Yeah.
group of people with behaviors and choices that are a part of that management. And with a
Hmm.
fear of, should we gain that autonomy and our uniqueness, that chaos will ensue. And of course, what we're learning is that's actually not true.
No,
Yeah.
so the opposite, but yeah, no, that's true.
Okay. Well, thank
Thank
you
you
very
very
much.
much, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate this chat and your time. And well, we'll wrap up. This is Mark A. Lewis. You've been listening to the Sacred Village podcast. My guest, Sarah Yavis.
Yes.
Yes. I do second guess myself with that, with the A. Sarah Yavis. Yeah. Sarah Yavis. Yeah, thank you very much for taking the time to listen. And we'll catch you later. Over and out. I lay my head down. Check out my lovely partner's music, Kristina Jessen, at KristinaJessen.com. And there's also more information on what we're doing. We're doing a land project up here, traditional land development with a community intention. And if you're interested in any of the retreats that we're a part of and part of organizing, you can find all that information at sacredvillagepodcast.com. Have a wonderful day. Floating down.